Hi everyone, it's Karen, and I'm back to do a tutorial on how I put together these paper dolls. I've made them before and I showed you the final product, but I just wanted to show you how I put them all together. So this is the paper doll that I use, and I have purchased these as a digital download, and I will link that in the description box below. And this particular paper doll had a blue dress, a light blue dress, and everything I had put together for her was more in the rose and pink shades, so I just took an alcohol marker and colored her dress, and that's it. And then I back her onto some lightweight cardboard and cut her out. And so I start by putting on a dress on her. And I just picked this really pretty lace. And this is actually a lace from Angel Dream Crafts Kim. And then you'll see there that I have cut the arms free. And that's something I had mentioned in my other video that I was shown. I saw that in someone else's video, a couple of different videos that I watched, and I don't remember them exactly, but they showed that just letting the arms be cut free from the body allows more movement in dressing them, and so they look more natural looking rather than just a piece of fabric that ends up getting stuck over the arms and everything. So I did cut along, and I think I showed that at the beginning of the video there, but you can see that's exactly what I did, was just cut right along the edge of where her bust is and where her arm came attached there, so that you can take the lace and cut it there the way I've done and shape it exactly to fit the bodice of her dress. And so I'm just using hot glue, and I always use a very small amount of glue, and I'm just gluing that lace down to the top of her dress. I usually start with just a flat piece of lace on the top, and then you can embellish and add to that afterwards, but you need to start somewhere, and so that's what I do. Now you can see I've got that piece there flapping, and I will cut that exactly along the edge of her bodice of her dress, not including the ruffle that is on her sleeves. So I will match that up when I'm cutting, and you can see I've cut it away, and it's exactly the shape of her bodice. Now there is a little extended piece on the bottom. I usually add a little extra piece of the cereal box when I'm gluing. I print it onto cardstock, and then I glue it onto the cereal box so that I have a little bit more cardboard sticking out the bottom, and that's where I can start attaching the dress, and you'll see the bodice or the bottom of her dress, and you'll see that as we get to that. But that's why I add that. Now, something I did with this particular paper doll that I wouldn't advise doing, and that is when I glued it onto the cereal box, I put the printed side of the cereal box out. And of course that will need to be covered, because I like to cover the back and make it all finished, and it's difficult to do that when the cereal box has got all that printing on it. So I end up covering that with just some lightweight cardstock paper, and then I cover it with lace, and you'll see that later. So what I'm doing here is I'm cutting out a little bit of a topping of a lace. I often tell you how I cut them off and I save them, because this is the little piece I've decided that I would like to put at her neckline. She has a bit of a ruffle on her dress, and I mean, you can do anything you want once you start with these paper dolls. You don't need to follow the dress exactly. You could, add in a different ruffle. You could add in some beads along there. You do what you want. But I really liked this loopy bit that was from the top of another lace. And as you can see, I'm holding it up there on her neckline, and I'm going to add some hot glue, and I'm going to glue it into place. Now I trimmed it down so that the bottom of it was as thin as possible where I had cut it off the lace, and so that I would get as nice a looking sort of little seam there along the edge where it attaches to the flat lace that I already had put on her bodice of her dress. And then I bring that right down to the very edge of her bodice of her dress, and where the seam is that I have cut. So it's not going onto her hands that are, she has her hands sort of raised up kind of right in front of her there. And I want to keep that all separate. And then I have a little piece there, and there's a ruffle that, of course, it runs up the back, and she's sort of standing turned a bit in this paper doll. She's not straight facing forward, so kind of the back part of her neckline comes around that way. So I wanted to put another little piece in there to match the neckline, and so I played and fiddled with it and cut it, and you know, this kind of work is, it takes time. It's kind of like doing miniatures. You have to cut things and fit them around her neck. And sometimes you have to try different ones too. Like sometimes you'll try a lace or a trim and it will be too big, or it just won't look right. And so then you dig around and you find something else and you keep trying it, and you finally find that perfect thing that when you hold it up, you just love it. And so that's what I've done here when I found this beautiful little loopy scallop that was from the top of another trim. And I just loved it, and I thought it looked so pretty at her neckline. So as I said, you do a lot of fiddling, you know, turn it one way, turn it the other, trying to decide what looks the best. And in actual fact, the way it's attached to the dress, it should, that part of the neckline should actually go the other way. I thought when I looked at it, but then I thought again, no, turn it the other way, let the loop stand up. That looks much better. Then I had to trim a bit off just so it would go tuck there behind her chin. And I finally figured it out, and then I attached it with some glue. I'm somebody who fiddles and would rather check and recheck 7 times before I glue. Because once you start putting the glue down, things are much more permanent, difficult to rip off, especially when you're adding things to paper. You can end up with a real mess on your hands, and it's not very nice. Then you have to start all over again. So I got the lace in place there and eventually get it glued down, and then we can move on. So after I finally finished with the neckline, I decided I wanted to try using that same trim around the bottom of her sleeves. But unfortunately I had to abandon that idea because this trim was quite stiff, and although I was able to just put it straight down there on her neckline, it was impossible to bend it to go around the sleeves and to make it lay nicely. So I ended up not using that and looking for something different. So here you can see I've picked up my scissors again, and I am taking away more of the paper that connects the whole top together. So as I had cut down on above the top arm, I'm now just cutting up a bit between the arms, so that instead of their sleeves just sort of connecting there and part of the dress being there, I've given more a division between the sleeves. And again, that's all part of that cutting the arms free so that you have you can make more definition between the bodice, between one sleeve and the other sleeve. And I think I'm at this point still trying not to abandon the idea of using the same trim that I used on the neckline, because in my mind that just had to be the same. But at some point I really did give up, and I started trialing other laces. And I don't know if you do the same thing I do, but I tend to audition a lot of different things when I am, especially when I'm creating like a doll's dress, because there's just so many details, like the neckline and sleeves and the bodice and then the skirt of the dress. And a part of that comes from the fact that I was a seamstress at one point in my life. I took it in high school, and I used to sew all my own clothes up until, you know, I was in my probably mid 20s, and I started sewing all my children's clothing. So that sort of comes into play when I'm creating. Sometimes it's hard to give up on an idea, but I finally, you know, decide that isn't going to work. Here I'm just piecing in a little piece of the bodice lace into the area of the bodice. And sorry I'm off screen there, but it's really difficult when you are doing these tutorials, because what happens as you're crafting is you pull the item in closer to you when you're working on a little detail, and you forget that you're going out of shot on the screen. So there's that little piece of lace there. You can see my thumb is just pressing it, and I had to fiddle with it quite a while to get it cut to fit just so perfectly in there, and then glued it down so that so there was that little piece of bodice between, you know, the bottom of her top arm and the bottom arm, but then there was the opening between the sleeves. And that's the look I decided I liked. I didn't want to take that out completely, because then her hands would be very vulnerable, because they would just be holding on by just her hands holding each other, which it would just be too vulnerable, and possibility of that being ripped or bent or whatever. And so I didn't want to do that. So that's what you saw me doing there. And then I think I auditioned quite a few different laces, trying to figure out what I'm going to use for the sleeves. I think at this point I'm back with the bodice lace, and I realized that there was a flower in the bodice, and if I cut out the flower and then I cut out the center of the flower, I could use the petals for the sleeves. And so that's what I end up doing. So I end up using the same lace as I used in the bodice, and I cut out that little flower, and now I'm cutting the center of the flower out. And we all do this quite often with doilies. You know, you find a doily you like and you're going to use it for something, and you cut out the center, and then you just use the petals. Basically, that's the petals of the flower there. And then I just decide which sleeve that's going to fit the best on, and I end up gluing that down. And then I just repeat the process. I find another flower. I need more petals for one sleeve than I do for the other. So I eventually find the right number of petals, and I get the sleeves, the bottoms of those sleeves, all done using the petals of the flower. So you can see here I cut out another flower, and I have the petals there, and I'm just matching them up to the bottom of that sleeve, just trimming it up, trimming off the extra petals that I don't need. And then I now have everything ready, and I'm gluing on those petals at the very base of the sleeves, and they're in place so that she now has these little flower petals are now create the bottoms of her sleeves and down onto her hands. Later on, I do decide to add some more embellishment to that, and that will be coming up later on when I start doing more embellishments. So here you can see that I've finished the bodice. The neckline is done, the sleeves on the dress are complete, and I have that little bit of lace just hanging down there at what will become her waist. And now I'm going to measure off some tulle. I like to add tulle underneath whatever I'm going to put as the skirt of the dress, because it does add the fullness. And what I do is I just take some of the tulle that I have. It's a 6-inch wide tulle, and I tie it in a knot. The knot helps create a little bit of bulk at the waist, and helps to define the skirt coming out there. And I've just found that that's a really good way of doing it. And so, and you don't need to make the knot really bulky, and just with some hot glue, just attach your tied piece. And really you can decide how long you want. Depends how long you want the dress. I usually make the piece quite a bit longer and then trim it back once I decide what I'm going to use to make the dress that covers over the tulle, because tulle is not expensive, and I'd rather have more than not enough. So I just pull off a good long piece. I tie a knot in the middle of it, and sorry, it's not on camera that I'm tying a knot, but there's the knot. And then I just put some hot glue on the area where the waist is going to be, and I attach that knotted tulle right on there. And that helps, as I said, create the waist and the start of the skirt of the dress. So I think I think I used two pieces of the tulle knotted in the front, and then later I believe I add one, possibly two. I can't remember for sure, but when I do the back, I add more tulle in on the back of her dress. I do the front of the dress and then work my way around. So here I have this lovely piece of eyelash lace. It's a very fine, delicate lace. I love the sort of fan shape that's on it, and I want to use this on part of the bodice of her skirt. I also have this beautiful peacock trim that I have from Angel Dream Crafts Kim, and I want to use this on her skirt. I love creating the skirts using several different laces and then bringing them all together. And I do some hand sewing to do that, and a bit of gluing in order to bring it all together. So I've cut that peacock trim out, so I have one of the smaller peacock pieces at the top and then the two long ones, and then I cut another set of the same thing of the three to put, that's sort of gonna, because of the way she's standing, that's sort of going to be the side and going to the back of her dress, and it will go around to the back side of the dress as well. And so I think I spent some time just cutting that out of the actual lace and getting, you can see there's the full piece of lace there, and there I'm just cutting out the shape I want. And I don't cut that trim at the top. I'm not going to use it, but see that little trim at the top? Well, that's the type of trim that I used at the neckline. And this is a more simple one. The one at her neckline is a more loopy one, but even the simple ones, they're great. They come in handy. So never cut them up. Take them off as a whole piece. And so I'm just cutting out, you can see I'm looking at it and making sure that I'm not cutting, you know, where I don't want to cut, and getting the shape of that peacock trimmed out there with the one at the top and then the two below. And so on the back, so the front side of her dress on the side and towards the back will be 6 of those lovely, beautiful peacock eyes from that lace, and that's from Angel Dream Crafts Kim. It's such a beautiful lace, and I do play with it a bit because as I'm designing these dolls and designing their dresses, I lay things down, I look at it, and I think, no, that's not what I want, this is what I want. And but I think, would it look good there? And so I try it, and then I went back to my original plan, which was to have it cascading down the side and towards the back of her dress. So I will continue. I have that in place now, and now I'm going to play with this beautiful eyelash trim that I want, and that I want to go down the front of her dress. And what I do is I cut out the little fan shapes that are within that lace. So you can see there's sort of a shape of the fan there. It's a little narrower at the top and it widens out at the bottom. And I put those down the front of her dress there. And I'm just sort of trimming it up there, getting it in the right shape. And that's what I end up doing is I lay that there. And then I cut out, I think, 2 more, and I lay those down and I connect them, and they become the front of her dress. So really you can use scraps to make these paper dolls, make their dresses, because I end up cutting pieces from larger pieces of lace anyway. You don't need anything of any great size, and the lace that I used for her bodice was a scrap. That little tiny piece was really all I had left of that gorgeous lace, and I used that to make the bodice. So I create the skirt, and I put the next one I put it under the one from above, and then I sort of play with it, look at it. It's all to your eye. It's what looks pleasing to you, what you want. And so I continue to cut out those fan shapes out of that eyelash trim and continue to put them in place down the front of the skirt. So now I have the eyelash trim laid out, and I have the peacock trim on the back, and I end up, when I let it lie and I don't squish down the tulle too much, I end up with a space between the peacock trim and the eyelash trim. And so I trial a few different laces in that spot, and I decide on this. It's about a 1 1/4 inch flat lace in a sort of a very light creamy color, and the dress is sort of a combination of white and cream colored laces. And so I cut the very heavy stitching on the edge of it off. That is something I do quite often because I find that they blend better together. It's just kind of the same as tearing paper as opposed to cutting paper. The edges of things blend together nicer. So when you just cut that heavy stitching that's always on the edge of a lace, if you cut it off, it just softens the lace down. And so now I'm just positioning it in that space that was created between when I let that eyelash trim just lie the way, without pulling on it and tugging on it, and the peacock trim, there was that space. So I want to fill that space, and that's what I'm going to do with this lace. And again, this is sort of a playing with it kind of thing, because the last thing you want to do is add tulle in under your dress and then put the dress over top, and when you stitch it and glue it in place, you just constrict the dress all down again because you made it too tight. So you just have to play with it and look at that and try and decide, yes, do I like that look? Or no, I need to add more lace. And don't be afraid to add something else in. If I would have had more of the eyelash lace, I probably would have tried using more of that as a trial, but I didn't. I only had enough of to cut those 3 fans that I ended up cutting out for the front of that dress. And I couldn't find anything else that made me happy for that. So I went with the choice to put a 3rd lace in the front. And it took me a while to come to that decision. It was a bit difficult because at first I wasn't sure if I liked it. But in the end, after I embellished everything, it actually turned out really, really pretty, which you'll see in the end. So sometimes you just have to kind of, piece something in there and envision it as it's not finished yet. I've got more to do. I can make this work, and you actually end up surprising yourself a lot of times. And that little piece of lace that I ended up using in the front, I think I ended up using 2 pieces actually, was all I had left of that lace as well. So I didn't have any more to work with, and so that was the final piece of that lace, and that lace also was from Angel Dream Crafts Kim. Now I'm threading my needle here because I'm going to do a little bit of tacking. Sometimes I tack and I take the stitches out. I just use them to hold things in place. Other times I actually make little tacking stitches that stay there. So right now what I'm doing is tacking the 2 pieces of tulle. Remember when I knotted it at the waist, I had there was a total of 4 pieces, but 2 in each of the sets of knots. I hope that makes sense, but if you think about it, there was 2 separate pieces that came down and they would split right in the front of the dress at some point. And so I'm tacking them together with just a tiny bit. The tulle was actually a sparkly pink tulle, light pink tulle. So I'm using 1 thread of embroidery floss in a light pink color, and I'm just stitching with a few tacking stitches. I'm stitching the tulle together at the bottom of the dress. So it'll end up having lace over top of it and probably other embellishments, so you're not going to see it, but it works much better than gluing. Gluing on tulle, especially in a spot like that, is not a great idea. You burn your fingers, and also it ends up showing more than a tiny tacking stitch in a color of thread that matches whatever you're working with there. And again, I think I was off screen, and I finally clued in and brought the project up a little higher there. And again, just doing a tacking stitch to hold the tulle together in the front of the dress so it doesn't split. Especially when you start putting the lace on top, the weight of the lace sometimes makes the tulle shift around and not lay the way you want it. So now that I finished tacking, I put a couple of tacking stitches down the front, and now I'm going to lay the lace back in place and start gluing it in place. So we start at the waist, put a little bit of glue along the top edge of that eyelash trim and glue it in right over top the knotted tulle at the top at the waist. And then the next piece I glue in is that extra trim I'm adding into the space. And I don't want it to necessarily be right up at the waist. It doesn't need the bulk up there. So I add it just underneath the knots so that it comes down. Because of course the dress tapers up to the waist, it's not the waist at the waist where the space occurred. It was down near the bottom of the dress. So that's definitely where I need that lace to fall. And so I laid it under the eyelash trim there, and I'm just looking at the fans that I had created and realized that I had cut one of them a little bit off. Which can happen when you're fussy cutting out of lace. Sometimes, especially with a fine lace like that, I missed a detail and I thought it looked odd. It just didn't, it wasn't the right size, and I had actually cut off part of the eyelash trim. So I actually went through, found another piece, which I was very thankful for because I actually didn't think I had any more of it. I found one other little piece and I was able to get the right cut and cut the fan out, and then just a little dab of glue there because this is very fine lace, and I also don't want the lace attaching to the like what I call the crinoline or the underskirt, which is the tulle. So I use either this little spatula to make sure of that. Sometimes I just slide my hand up underneath. I'm very fortunate. My fingers are very able to handle the hot glue, and so I don't find that that's an issue. But using these little silicone spatulas, you can even use a regular size silicone spatula that you can pick up at the dollar store. Anything to keep the lace loose. The other thing that does is keep the lace have a feel of a flow to it. If you glue everything down and glue everything together with a lot of glue and also glue it to all the underskirt, it's very stiff and very it's not as nice. It's not as nice feeling, and it's not as nice looking. So I use minimal amounts of glue, and I make sure that it's not only glued in the places that I want it to be glued, not underneath onto everything as well. The other thing I do is I do some hand stitching on the skirt when I'm piecing together these pieces. I didn't choose to do that with the eyelash trim because it was very difficult to hide the stitches. I did try, and I wasn't happy with the way it looked, and I tried it a little bit with the glue, and I was much happier with the look I got with a small amount of glue, as opposed to trying to stitch those 3 fan pieces together to create the skirt. So that's why I did use glue there, and just made sure I kept the tulle, free from the tulle. Here I'm just shaping those fan pieces. Again, they're only glued a little bit together there in the center of each fan as they go down. So I have to decide, how are they going to mold around the side of the dress going towards the back, and how will they fit with the lace next to it. And that you spend a little bit of time doing that and just setting it in place. And again, trying not to push your tulle down and make your dress smaller, because the whole purpose of the tulle was to give the dress a bit of a fullness to the skirt. So I'm just adding in that second piece of the flat lace that is going to fill that space between the eyelash trim and the peacock trim at the back. And so I just put a little bit of hot glue there on the edge of the lace to attach them together. And again, getting my silicone spatula in there and making sure that it's not gluing to the tulle underneath. And that's sort of a process that I do, all the way down the front of the dress there. And of course, every time you pick the paper doll up when you're working on it, until you start getting things really well attached, everything shifts and you have to, reposition everything, and that's just the way it goes. So at this point, I'm just massaging the lace. If you massage lace in your hands and warm it up, if it has a kink in it, you can often actually make that kink, it heats up and it kind of flattens it down. You pinch it between your thumbs. I'm just being lazy. I could go and take it to the iron and iron it. I just, you know, I don't use an iron unless I absolutely have to. So here I'm adding the peacocks down that back side, cascading down, and I have the one at the top and then the two bigger ones, and then I'm adding the second set. So I just have a little bit of glue that I put on the back of that first eye of the peacock trim, and that is the only place that I attached it. And then I made sure all these little tendrils were all laying nice and straight, and I kind of tug them a bit so that they're laying nice and straight, and then lay that second piece over top. And I think now I've sort of finished off the front part of the dress here to my liking. I have the eyelash trim, I have the middle trim, and I have her beautiful peacock trim cascading down the back. And that is going to be the end of the first part of this video. And when I come back, I will show you how I continue on adding in the back of the dress. And I hope to see you come back and we'll proceed more making this beautiful paper doll. Thanks for stopping by, everybody. Take care. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.